Wyoming Territory, 1879. The dust cloud came first rolling low along the edge of the cottonwoods, curling around the hooves of a chestnut gelding that slowed to a trot as it neared the creek. Perce Vallen tugged gently on the reins, eyes narrowing at the sight of someone crouched near the water's edge. It was a woman. Her dress was faded blue, hemmed damp from the grass, and her apron was heavy and full near her waist. She looked up quick when she heard the horse, startled, but did not run. Instead, she shielded whatever was in her apron with both hands and stood her ground. Perce swung off his horse with the ease of a man who had worked cattle and crossed rivers since he was 15. He was 29 now, still wore the same battered hat from his trail days, and had a quiet way about him that made folks either trust him or stay far clear. His voice was low, steady. "You all right, miss?" She didn't answer right away. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, but a few strands had fallen around her cheekbones. Her eyes were brown, sharp but tired. She was breathing fast. Then she shifted her apron slightly, like she meant to hide it. Perce caught the smell of fresh bread, still warm. "It's for my sick brother," she said quickly, chin lifting. That stopped him. He looked down at the misshapen lumps under the cloth. There were at least 3 loaves in there, maybe 4. She had risked walking alone in the open with nothing but bread wrapped in linen. "What's your name?" he asked. "Florence. Florence Penley." Perce touched the brim of his hat. "Perce Vallen." Florence gave a slight nod, but her hand stayed firm over the bread. "He's fevered," she said, voice softer now. "Hasn't kept food down in 2 days. I was at Mrs. Jellen's. She gives me extra flour if I help with her washing. I baked what I could this morning before walking out here. Where's your brother?" She pointed across the creek and up the ridge toward a cluster of cottonwoods. "Cabin just beyond those trees. It ain't much, but it stays dry. I'm only out here 'cause I thought I heard a coyote earlier. I didn't want it getting close to the house." Perce nodded. "You're not carrying a rifle?" "No. I got a carving knife in my boot, but that's it." He let out a short breath, not laughing, just surprised. "That's brave." She shrugged. "No choice." He looked toward the ridge. "Let me help you carry it. That bread's already half crushed, and you've still got a ways." Florence hesitated. "Why would you?" "Because you look like you need it." After a moment, she let him take half the bundle. He was careful with it, wrapping the loaves in his kerchief before tying them to his saddle. She walked beside him as they crossed the creek. The sun had begun to dip when they reached the cabin, a single-room structure with a sagging porch and a chimney patched with river stone. Perce tied his gelding to the post and followed Florence inside. A boy maybe 17 lay under a tattered quilt. His skin was slick with sweat, cheeks hollow. Florence knelt beside him, dipped a cloth in a basin, and pressed it to his forehead. The boy stirred, muttered something. "That's Owen," she said. "He caught something last week. I have been boiling willow bark, giving him water, but—" Perce stepped forward. "Mind if I look? You a doctor?" "No, but I have seen fever before." She moved aside. Perce crouched beside Owen, checked his pulse, lifted one of the boy's eyelids. Then he pulled a tin flask from his coat. "This is willow tincture. Stronger than the bark tea." Florence frowned. "Where did you get that?" "Traveled with a trail medic last spring. He taught me how to make it." She nodded, watching him pour a few drops between Owen's lips. The boy grimaced, but swallowed. Perce stood. "He needs rest. Cool cloth, broth when you can. If the fever breaks by morning, he might be through the worst." Florence sat back against the wall, eyes closing for a second. "Thank you." Perce looked around the room, bare shelves, stacked firewood, a Bible, a cracked mirror on the wall, 2 plates on the table, 1 chair. "You live here alone?" "Since our father passed. 2 years now." Owen was 15 then. I was 20. Perce nodded slowly. "You did all this yourself?" She shrugged. "Someone had to." He looked at her again, at the quiet grit in her face, the way she had not complained once. "You are something else, Florence Penley." She gave a tired smile. "You are not too bad yourself, Perce Vallen." That evening, Perce stayed out on the porch, sharpening his knife with slow, practiced strokes. He did not ask if he could stay. He just did, and she did not ask him to leave. When the coyotes called near the ridge, he was already loading his rifle. Florence stepped out onto the porch, arms folded. The firelight from inside spilled across her face. "You do not have to keep watch." "I know," he said, "but I want to." She stood there for a moment, then sat on the step beside him. After a while, her head rested lightly against his shoulder. Neither of them said anything, and for the first time in a long while, Florence felt a little less alone. The wind moved through the trees above them, soft and steady. She closed her eyes. Perce did not move. He just sat there, warm and solid beside her, like he had always known she would come into his life this way. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready to stay. By morning, ash from the stove drifted in the corners of the cabin, the air inside thick with damp wool and the stale tang of sickness. Perce had barely slept, but he felt no worse for it. He stepped in from the porch at first light, boots quiet on the wood floor. Florence sat beside Owen's bed, hair unpinned and falling down her back. She looked up when the door creaked. "He took water," she said. "Didn't gag on it this time." Perce crossed the room, knelt, and laid the back of his hand against Owen's neck. The boy's skin was cool, pulse slower. He pulled back, nodding once. She exhaled and leaned forward, forehead resting on her arms, the tension pulling away from her shoulders. "I'll fetch kindling," Perce said. Florence didn't answer, just reached for the pot and scraped the last of the oats into a tin bowl, sliding it toward the coals. The sun was barely above the trees when Perce returned, arms full. He stacked the wood neatly beside the hearth, then turned toward Florence, who had tied her hair back and was kneading dough at the table, sleeves pushed to her elbows. "You got a plan for when he's well enough to walk?" he asked. She didn't look up. "We'll stay here till spring. I can take in mending. There's still folk in these hills need shirts patched and socks darned." "You ever think of going south?" he asked. "Snow's thinner down near Rollins. Plenty of freight wagons pass through." She paused, fingers still in the dough. "Don't know anyone there." "You know me." Florence's hands stilled. "You passing through?" He shook his head. "I'm done drifting." She looked at him then, quiet and still, dough clinging to her fingers. "I've got a team waiting east of the ridge," he said. "We were hauling fencing for the Houghton Ranch. They can manage without me. I told them I'd catch up if I needed to." Florence wiped her hands on her apron. "You left your work to stay here." "I didn't plan to. I just didn't want to ride away." The kettle hissed behind them. Florence turned and poured hot water into a chipped cup, then handed it to him. "You always do what you feel like?" she asked. "No," he said, "but I've learned to act when something feels right." She sat across from him at the table, resting her hands in her lap. Not many men that do. Perce watched the steam rise between them. "You trust people easy?" "I've had to trust strangers," she said, "but I don't forget what they show me." He sipped the water, then set the cup down. "What have I shown you?" "That you don't talk just to fill the air." He gave a slow nod. "And you don't ask for help unless it's earned." They sat a while like that, no need to fill the silence. The wind moved through the chinks in the logs, lifting the corner of a lace curtain near the window. Florence stood. "I need to bring in the wash water before it freezes." "I'll carry the pail," he offered, rising. "I can manage." "I didn't say you couldn't." She hesitated, then handed him the empty tin. As they stepped outside, the snow from 2 days back crunched faint beneath their boots. The creek still ran, though thin and slow now, the banks crusted in ice. Florence dipped the pail, braced it with one leg, and watched him. "You got family?" she asked. "No, just a few old friends I've worked with over the years." "You ever miss it? Belonging somewhere?" He tipped the pail to help her balance it. "Only when I find a place I'd rather stay." They walked back together. At the door, Owen's voice reached them, faint but clear. "Flo." She hurried inside. The boy had pushed himself up against the pillow, eyes open, breath shallow but steady. "You're up," she said, kneeling by him. He blinked slowly. "There's a man in the house." Perce stepped forward. "Name's Perce. Helped you through the fever." Owen studied him. "You staying long?" Florence brushed hair from her brother's forehead. "As long as we need," she said. Perce didn't speak, but his boots stayed planted on the cabin floor. Florence looked up at him, and he met her eyes. Neither of them needed to say the rest. By the 4th day, Owen could sit up long enough to peel potatoes. His hands still trembled some, but color had returned to his face, and the sharp edge of fever had left his eyes. Florence handed him a worn dish rag to steady the bowl in his lap. "Don't bruise him," she said, setting the kettle back on the stove. "I'm not," he muttered, though his slices came out uneven. Perce was outside splitting wood. Florence could hear the rhythm of the axe. 2 strikes, then pause, then another. She rinsed the flour cloth and hung it near the fire. Owen glanced toward the door. He's good with his hands. She folded the apron she'd been mending, smoothing the creases. He works cattle? You'd expect that. He doesn't act like the others that came through. Florence paused, then picked up the pile of buttons she'd sorted. He hasn't asked for anything. Owen nodded. Think he's waiting for you to ask first. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she threaded a needle, slow and steady, and began stitching the buttons onto a mended flannel shirt. Out back, the chopping stopped. A few minutes later, Perce stepped into the cabin, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. Stack's full, he said. Florence nodded toward the kettle. There's coffee if you want some. He poured himself a tin cup and leaned against the wall, watching Owen work the knife clumsily through another potato. You keep at it like that, Perce said. You'll be peeling for the whole valley come winter. Owen grinned. Better than lying in bed all day. Perce sipped the coffee, then set the cup down. I saw some rabbit tracks near the stream. Big ones. Might be enough for stew. Florence looked up. You thinking of trapping? Thinking of showing Owen how to. The boy's face lit up. I still got Pa's old snares under the porch. Florence hesitated. Won't be easy, not if they've already been spooked once this week. They haven't, Perce said. Tracks were fresh. No boot prints nearby. Owen was already reaching for his boots, nearly tipping the bowl. I'll get the snares. Florence stood, catching the bowl before it fell. You'll wait till you can walk without leaning on the doorframe. Owen frowned, but sat back down. I can do more than you think. I know what you can do, she said. I'm the one who's had to watch it. Perce picked up his coat. I'll set the first trap. He can help clean if we catch something. After he left, Owen leaned back in the chair, arms crossed. You like him? Florence didn't answer. You never let anybody stay more than a night. And you let him split our wood. She folded the shirt she'd finished. He's decent. Owen glanced at the door. He's more than that. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling low through the trees. The sky had gone flat and pale, the way it did before snow. That night, Perce brought back 2 rabbits strung over his shoulder. He dressed them cleanly on the back porch, hands steady and quiet. Florence boiled onions with salt and bay, and the stew simmered into something richer than they'd tasted in weeks. They ate at the table, Owen seated between them, his appetite back and full. Afterward, Florence washed the bowls while Perce dried them. You ever think of buying land? She asked, not looking up from the basin. He passed her the last spoon. I've thought about it. Never had reason to settle before. Water dripped from her fingers as she set the spoon aside. And now, he folded the towel and hung it on the peg. Now I do. She turned to face him. Her eyes didn't hold challenge, just quiet steadiness, like she was measuring the weight of his words. I won't leave Owen behind. I wouldn't ask you to. They stood like that a while longer, the only sound the ticking of the stove as it cooled. Owen had already gone to bed, the door to the sleeping alcove drawn partway closed. Florence stepped back, brushing her hands on her skirt. There's a parcel east of here. Belonged to the Kleins before they moved to Laramie. Cabins near Fallen Inn, but the land's good. Perce nodded once. How far? Half-day's ride. He didn't smile, but there was something settled behind his eyes. I'd like to see it. Florence reached for the oil lamp and turned the wick low. Tomorrow, then. The light faded to amber. She didn't say good night, but as she passed by him, her hand brushed his lightly just once before she stepped into the darkened alcove. Perce stood alone in the quiet afterward, the smell of stew and firewood still thick in the air. He didn't need to speak to know what was changing between them. All of it was unfolding slow, steady, like snow beginning to fall without a sound. They left just after first light, the cabin shuttered and quiet behind them. Owen had insisted he could manage the hearth and broth on his own, though Florence had laid out everything he might need in neat rows on the table. Perce led the way with the gelding, reins looped loose in his hand. Florence walked beside him, her boots crunching through the morning frost. The trail east wound low along the ridge, where frost still clung to the roots of yellowing sage. A thin mist rose from the ground, curling around the tops of their boots. Neither of them spoke much at first. The hush of the land seemed to ask for quiet. Only when the sun broke fully across the slope did Florence speak. You ever build a cabin? Perce glanced toward her, then forward again. Helped a man raise one near Sweetwater once. He had 7 sons, though. I mostly handed up nails and held the ladder. Florence's mouth curved slightly. We won't have 7 sons. He raised an eyebrow. You planning that already? I'm not saying anything, she said, though her voice carried warmth. Only that I don't favor tall ladders. Perce gave a short breath of amusement, but didn't reply. They kept walking. It was near mid-morning when they crested the rise, and the land opened wide in front of them. The hills sloped down into a shallow basin where the grasses, though winter-browned, still bent in long waves across the flats. A cluster of cottonwoods marked a dry creek, and the remains of the Klein cabin stood just beyond it, weathered, slumped to one side, but still upright. Florence stopped a few paces from the edge of the bluff. That's it. Perce took it in with a measured look, scanning the slope of the land, the shape of the trees, the way the wind moved through the grass. He walked ahead without a word, then crouched near the cabin's corner post. The bottom logs were sunk deep with rot, but the roof beams were solid, pitched clean to shed snow. 2 rooms, he asked. Yes, kitchen and a sleeping room. They didn't have children. He stood, brushing bark dust from his fingers. You'd want to plant near the creek? If it runs in spring, she said. There's black soil near the bend. We could get potatoes in early if the frost lifts. Perce nodded, walking a slow circle around the place. Florence watched him move, head tilted, eyes scanning the ground like he was reading more than just the lay of it. When he came back around, he paused in front of her. You'd be happy here? She looked out over the basin. It's not much, but it's quiet. And I know how to make quiet into enough. Perce didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, You see that rise, just west of the trees? She followed his gaze. The red rock edge? That's where I'd put the barn. It'll stay drier come thaw. She turned to him fully then. You really mean to stay? I do. Her eyes didn't soften, but she stepped closer. You know what that means, don't you? He met her gaze. It means I'll be here when the roof leaks, when the bread burns, and when Owen breaks more tools than he fixes. She reached out and rested her hand lightly on his chest. It means you'll be mine. He covered her hand with his. I already am. The wind moved through the cottonwoods behind them, lifting the edge of her scarf. She didn't pull away. He didn't move, just stood with her there until the sun rose higher and the cold began to lift from the ground. Later, they walked the land together, marking where the fence might go, where a henhouse would sit, how much wood could be salvaged from the collapsed lean-to. They spoke in quiet tones, not dreaming, but planning each word placed like a stone in a foundation. On the ride back, they shared the saddle, her hand resting easy on his thigh, his arm steady around her waist. The trail wound slowly beneath them, but neither seemed to mind the pace. When the cabin came into view again, smoke trailed from the chimney. Owen had done as he said he would. The broth was hot, the hearth tended, the blankets shaken and set straight. Florence stepped inside first, removing her shawl. You were right, she said without looking at either of them. Perce followed her in, closing the door against the wind. About what? She turned, eyes steady. You didn't ride away. The thaw came slow that year, not with a rush of melting snow, but with a steady shift in the air, the kind that made the ground soften by degrees and turned the creek from a trickle into a murmur. By March, Owen was walking the ridge at Perce's side, helping him mark out the posts for the first fence line. His gait was still uneven, but each morning he rose without asking and pulled on his boots. Florence worked in the mornings while the light was best, mending coats for ranch hands who rode up from scattered homesteads with saddlebags full of threadbare wool. By midday she was outside, sleeves rolled, clearing brush near the foundation of the new cabin. Perce offered to take that task more than once, but she waved him off. You can't build a home for me if I won't build it with you, she said once, gripping the handle of the spade. He smiled, then not with words, but deep in his eyes, and went back to splitting boards. By early April, the old Klein place had been stripped of what could be salvaged. They used the best beams for the new frame, setting them with care and sweat and half-muttered prayers when the corners didn't square. Florence stood on a crate to help raise the side wall, her hands raw but steady. Owen mixed mortar with creek water, sleeves soaked past the elbows. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridge and the frame stood upright for the first time, Florence leaned against the rail of the wagon, her chin resting on her arm. You ever think you'd be the kind of man to settle in one place? she asked. Perce wiped sawdust from his hands and set down the hammer. I didn't think I'd be the kind of man anyone would want to stay for. She reached out and took his wrist, fingers curling around the inside where the skin was warm and unweathered. You were wrong, she said. He stepped closer, brushing a curl from her temple. So were you. She leaned into him, forehead pressing to his chest. For a long moment, the sounds around them faded: the creak of the trees, the last bird calls, the scrape of Owen's boots on stone. There was only the steady beat beneath his shirt and the scent of pine on the collar. They married in May, beneath the cottonwoods that had stood silent since the first frost. Mrs. Jolon came up from the valley with a basket of biscuits and a tin cross sewn into a strip of muslin. Florence wore a dress she'd let out twice and stitched fresh lace to at the cuffs. Perce wore his cleanest shirt and a nervousness that made Owen nudge him once, hard, just to get him to breathe. The preacher from Rawlins arrived late, apologizing for the mud and the condition of his mare. Florence only smiled, said the Lord would understand. The vows were short, spoken plain. When the ring didn't fit quite right, Perce adjusted it gently, sliding it past her knuckle with both hands. She looked up at him, and something in her face softened so fully it stopped the wind itself. Owen stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching them like he had known all along how it would go. That night, they returned to the cabin together. The roof was on, the hearth was lit, and the bed had been made with fresh linen. Florence stood at the doorway and looked around the room they had built with their hands, walls straight, shelves hung. A table shaped from the redwood Perce had hauled down from the ridge. He stepped behind her, arms sliding around her waist. You ready? He asked. She leaned back against him. I've been ready since the day you didn't ride away. He bent his head, mouth brushing the curve of her neck. Then let's start the rest of it. Years passed. The fences held. The creek never ran dry. Owen left at 22 to work in the stockyards near Cheyenne, but returned each fall to help with the harvest. He built his own place 2 ridges over, married a girl who baked bread better than Florence, though no one said so aloud. Perce never drifted again. He spent his days with his hands in the earth, his evenings at Florence's side mending boots, reading scripture aloud, pressing warm tea into her palms on cold nights. She planted a garden that stretched the length of the southern slope and raised chickens so stubborn they once chased Perce out of the yard. They had a daughter in the 3rd spring, born in the cabin with Florence's fingers clenched tight in his, and the midwife humming low near the fire. They named her Eliza, after Perce's mother. She grew up knowing the shape of her father's laughter and the sound of her mother's quiet strength. They grew old without noticing, one day folding into the next. The land stayed theirs, the house weathered but upright, and the love between them never lost its shape. Perce never did say the words often, but he showed her in every fence post he straightened, every stew he stirred on late nights when she was weary, every time he reached for her hand without needing to speak. And Florence never asked for more than that. Their life was not grand, but it was good, and it was theirs.